Hi, my name is Dr. Raja Quiller and welcome to my clinic here in Cheshire, United Kingdom. I'm UK Ambassador for Botox and Juvederm and Global Key Opinion Leader in Cosmetic Dermatology. Today we're going to be talking about injection rhinoplasty. The purpose of this is to lift the tip of the nose, narrow the alar width, and also to create the impression of straightening and definition down the midline. I'll be using an 8-point injection strategy which uses both botulinum toxin and also dermal fillers to achieve a global result. When considering injection rhinoplasty or rhinomodulation in our patients, it's really important to identify where the problems lie, the underlying anatomical issues, and then to mark and treat very accurately. There can be a dynamic and a resting component to nasal defects, so let's talk about those first. Our patient, 36 years old, her concerns are nasal widening, so we have width of the alar base. She also complains that her tip is depressed and there may be a dynamic and a resting component to this. The other issue is that there's a very slight dorsal hump with a depression here at the glabella or the dorsofrontal angle, and also just inferior to the dorsal hump here. We know that injection at this position here at the alar base will narrow the nasal width to promote elevation at the tip. Injection at the base of the septum will elevate the tip upwards, and then direct injection upwards across the nasal bridge either side of the dorsal hump will give a better union between the nasofrontal angle and the depression just inferior to the hump. Then finally, when we get into botulinum toxin and its indication, we can treat the nasalis muscle, so go show me a scrunch and relax. Now a big smile. Deepening of the alar fossa, so this muscle here is levator labii alequi nasi, so we can inject here. Dilate your nostril, so there's slight widening there caused by the dilator of the nose, so we can inject directly into the nostril itself to soften the dilatation and therefore narrow the nasal width. And then finally, at the base of the septum, the attachment of depressor nasi septi up against the bony nasal spine and up into the cartilaginous nasal septum. So let's start at position number 1, which is going to be at the alar base. We're going to be injecting product just in behind the nostril here, but it's very important to respect the facial artery which traverses through this area, and then it becomes the angular or marginal artery up against the nasal wall. So, 45-degree angle, in and deep. So I'm up against the piriform aperture now, always aspirating. You'll see a big aspiration bubble coming into the syringe. And now we start to lift. So we can change the angle slightly, injecting slow to come a little bit more inferior for a better angle and lifting, like so. And all the time just assessing the amount of vertical lift that we're getting with the product. To lift and narrow. Now what we can do is we can inject a little bit more adjacent to the alar, so generating lift right behind the cartilage. So deep, and again at the piriform aperture to generate projection and lift. Now we lift the alar base upwards and forwards. Our patient may experience some pressure when we do this. and then assess for narrowing. We can see that there is a change in angle from a more vertical to a more lateral projection of the nostril, simply by volumetrics. So what we can see from injection at position number 1 here, at the alar base, is a narrowing of the nostril on the left side, compared to the right side, which is a little flared. You can assess this by looking at the depression above the nostril on one side compared to the other, and the angle of convexity versus flattening on the other side. This is by lifting up the base of the alar to give projection at the cartilage of the alar as well as partly at the tip. But now let's concern ourselves with the tip and its elevation. Now, to achieve this with a dermal filler, we need to use something with adequate viscosity and lifting capacity at this position. This will be deep at 45 degrees down in behind the nasal septum and its cartilage on the nasal spine to project forwards and elevate the tissue. The idea is that we want to lift the base of the nose to create tip elevation. So, 45 degrees, I'm in, and when I'm down on the nasal spine, this is my landmark. Always aspirating here hard because of the septal artery, and then we just gradually just infiltrate. Slight discomfort for the patient here, but this soon wears off as the anaesthetic takes control. And we're assessing for correction here at the tip, for projection. Always injecting slowly, so we want to control the comfort, but also not compromise any vasculature in this area. Once I'm happy with the level of tip elevation, I would then take the material and we just gently mould it and massage it in behind the septum, like so. A slight pinch so that we get it in behind the septum and we can shape it to create a pillar of lift which is vertical. And now we can see appreciable narrowing with openness of the nasal show. So if we rotate, like so, there's a more open angle. So with our trocar, we make a small incision just at the nasal tip. And allow that to dilate the tissue. So we take our cannula, use the trocar, and just insert into the correct tissue plane, which is in this subcutaneous tissue, and gently advance it, pinching the skin as we go to create room, up through the nasal bridge, always ensuring that we're in the midline, until we're satisfied with the tip being in the right position. So we can see now that the cannula is at this position here, at this position, which is at the nasofrontal angle. We want to use product now at this position and then further back at this position too. So retaining the material at the nasal bridge here, we would start to inject very slowly, not depositing too much. Then not over the nasal bridge. Come back. Once we're below the nasal bridge here, we would then leave and retain. And then a little more at the tip here. As we come away, we want to generate tip elevation at this position. So now to summarize, we lifted the base of the alar fossa, we lifted the alar cartilage, lifted the tip from the base of the septum, lifted the tip at its source, and corrected above and below the dorsal hump, there is still a slight depression just located here. So we can finish off, after doing the cannula work, with one simple midline injection technique here, just to promote some lift of the tissue. Small amount of product, and always making sure that you mould at the same time. So now, following injection at point number 1, point number 2, point number 3 at the tip here, and point number 4, we have now achieved a linear correction across the nasal bridge. In fact, rather than achieving just straight correction, she now has a degree of tip elevation here, which is showing more nasal aspect, opening the angle of the nasophiltral angle. If we want to finish by achieving a little more tip elevation, we can achieve further correction by injecting in between the cartilage, like so, to give more projection and lift, and again to lift and shape. To give even more tip elevation. And now it's time to move to toxin. So we can use botulinum toxin in the nasalis muscle, in the dilator muscle, in the levator labii alequi nasi, as well as in the depressor nasi septi. Dosages, 3 to 4 units, 1 unit, 1 unit, and 4 units. The depth in this area will be deep in this area, so if you can scrunch for me, relax. So we want to be through skin, into the muscle, and then on the bone. And this is 3-unit injection. The next injection site is the levator labii alequi nasi muscle. This is located at the upper margin of the alar cartilage and within 5 millimeters to the edge of the nose. So we inject deep and only 1 unit. And just flare your nostril for me now, and again. So this is the muscle which flares the nostril. Again, we want to inject fairly superficially, so skin, then just through into the muscle. 1 unit, and that's done. Now all that is left to achieve is the correction at this position here, to lift the alar cartilage on her right hand side, to give further projection and lift, but also to narrow this angle here. So a nice slow injection to lift the cartilage and not compromise any of the vasculature around this area. We can change the angle slightly now, reposition to here. Again, always aspirating. Then we inject the depressor nasi septi, which at a 45-degree angle, the same plane as the dermal filler, through the skin, through the muscle and onto its bony insertion, and we'll use 4 units.